broadcasting on RTM Click and MyTV's Berita RTM channel 123, which is also live streaming on YouTube. I'm your host, Mona Priya. ASEAN member states have made a firm commitment to ensure that the region's digital space is safe, inclusive and resilient, especially in the face of growing online threats. Now, this commitment was underscored at the recent 17th Conference of ASEAN Ministers Responsible for Information, or UMRI, held in Brunei Darussalam. Now, the meeting saw the landmark adoption of the Kuala Lumpur Declaration on Safe and Responsible Use of Social Media Platforms for ASEAN. So the key question is, how will these commitments translate into real-world action? To explore this, we're joined today by Dr. Nur Nirwandi Mat Nurdin, Security and Political Analyst from the Centre for Media and Information Warfare Studies, UITM. Doctor, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Now, Doctor, from your perspective, how significant is this declaration? Does it change anything?
I think it's important for us to understand that we're living in a digital age where social media is part of our civilizations in communication. So it's very significant because it brings a footstep for ASEAN to go to underscore real elements of looking into what are the perspective of making the digital element, particularly social media, a very safe zone for all the particular people around the world, particularly in the ASEAN region, because we're talking about the stability of how the structures of communication works in some certain countries. Of course, there are some disparity of countries. They're looking into some countries, they're a little bit more way back underdeveloped in ASEAN country, but that's not the main issues here. The main issues here is on how that the development of these social media interactions within the ASEAN countries, the social media regulations, social media frameworks, and we have not touched yet about the artificial intelligence that coming in soon.
That's right.
But we are looking into how this perspective can change a very way of perspective, how social media interactive element will go. And this is important because as media, we do have to look into the element of what are the elements that we can project in the context of this declaration. And by having Malaysia as one of the major players, we are the middle power. In this region, we have been accepted and known as the middle power of the ASEAN for what the effort we are doing, and we are also quite advanced in looking into what needs to be done in the context of social media security. So this is the element of security perspective. It's very much significant because it will explore the capability of Malaysia and other ASEAN countries to own and to project their own social media regulations, guidelines, systematic review processes, and particularly the most important on how the ASEAN people interact using the social media. And the social media safety guideline, I think, is very fundamental in a way because as ASEAN countries, we need to understand that ASEAN need to explore more in advance of what we have today and beyond tomorrow. So this is something I think is very much significant, and we look into how the ASEAN we rest into this context and what are the major steps we taken on. Because if we look into the Malaysian context, for example, particularly we are a little bit on advanced on this. Why I say we are advanced? Because we have
to the countries in the region.
I mean in the region by itself, because we have some regulations. Recently, we have licensed all the social media platform, internet social media providers in our countries, and we also have launched some chatbot IFA, artificial intelligence fact-check system, to look into all the fake news, combatant or the fake news. And we are a little bit more advanced in such a thing. We have Sebenar.my by the MCMC for quite some time. So this makes Malaysia to be the pioneer of looking into how the social media regulation and the declaration of the Kuala Lumpur, Deklarasi Kuala Lumpur, is a thing that put our footmark, a print, elements of how we can review this and how we can project this into other countries. So I think it's very much significant. It's importantly significant because it also brings into Malaysia diplomatic level on putting the Malaysian frame into the social media context. And this will project, I think, lots of good positive image for the Malaysia and particularly for the ASEAN. So this is the matter on how we are leading this pack of ASEAN community and how that declaration acknowledge our formality as one of the key members of the social media practitioner, good practice that we have in our country. And this significantly will boost our image as a middle power as well.
Now, Doctor, on that note, disinformation has always been used as a tool of hybrid warfare. Now, how vulnerable is the ASEAN region when it comes to such threats?
It is a very interesting question as a really part of our discussion, because we talk about context of media warfare, information warfare. There are some element of security and threatening situation that happens around us. We're talking about the rise of supremacy in European country. In fact, we're looking into some element of terrorism, radicalism, extremism. And this is something that have to be awakened by all the ASEAN communities, because in the context of digitalization, globalization, there are some findings that stated that when we are going into much more deeper elements of technological apparatus, we used to have all the elements that we call the globalizations, the effect of globalization that will make us to be interactive with each other and get us to know what are the other dimensions and segmentations of the other parts of the world. But when we are getting closer into this technological apparatus in the context of social media, we are basically moving into the ideological representation part. So this is why you have to follow me through in this context, because when we're talking about much more people are interactive in the form of technology, particularly a social media platform, chat app, messaging, using a personal communication, community networks. Basically, they are going a little bit more deeper into their ideological set of representation. Because theology, we try to be much more confined and try to be more rigid within the perimeter of what they have been discussed. And this leads into much more good representation. It is positive element. Let's say you talk about sport, hobby, hikings, anything.
That's good.
And that's good.
Yeah.
But when we're moving to another context, radicalization element, extremism element, for example, in terms of believing into something that fundamentally wrong. In the context of human rights, in the context of ideological representation, religious harmony, and form of that element according to some nature of federal constitution, for example, in our country. So this will lead all this representation for the movement to be permitted by their own set of belief and ideology. And eventually, the social media interaction, we're getting much more hardened and deepened with that kind of constructs of information. And this eventually will lead into more radical representations of extremism contact within that perimeter of network. So this is the dangerous zone of when we talk about the media, the hybrid warfare. And if we move into this context, now people have the element that we call the supremacy element. The supremacy not in the wrong context, supremacy in the content that they can generate their own content. They can generate their own video. They can generate their own perspective of anything they would like. So eventually, this will snowball into a lot of elements of desire making some content interactive. This element of radicalism, extremism, in accordance with what they believe for, what they believe to. So this is hybrid warfare. It have to be looked into this serious context, because we don't want this perimeter, we don't want this hybrid element of warfare to build a generation or subset of this radicalization, terrorism outlet, or any form of extremism that goes against the humanity, that goes against the humanitarian ground. Of course, we're not touching about the Palestine-Israel conflicts. That is a subject matter of another representation by regional international violations of human rights. We're talking about the social media in the context of ASEAN. So ASEAN really have to be careful, because if we miss looking into this process, if we miss looking into this element opportunity for this radicalism, extremism to grow in ASEAN countries, and we fail to coordinate it within the ASEAN territories, what do we get in the future might be the representations, the outlets of radicalism, extremism, warfare that will try to take charge or take the opportunity of the growing ASEAN representation of the social media. And you can see that the isolation of some certain countries. Some countries are fully developed in terms of 4G. Well, we are looking to 5G coming on. Of course, we're looking to some certain state in our country, Sabah, Sarawak, others, some element of state, and some countries in Peninsula. And this also goes into some ASEAN countries. Looking into some ASEAN countries that may lag behind in the context of social media technology, in the context of that. So the learning process have to be charged before they even enter the world of the social media dynamics in the perspective of 5G, 6G. And of course, the contemplations and the contemporary element of using AI as a tool or mechanism to create some things in the foundations of what they believe. So this is what I meant by the hybrid warfare. And this is something very serious. That's why when we look into this UMRI decision, I think it's a very big decision actually. And I do put my hat off to all the ministers that involved. I think this is something that we have to recognize and we have to pull this through together. Because when we talk about hybrid warfare, radicalism, extremism, this is something that happens worldwide. It happens in some other region. It happens not only in ASEAN. It happens in some other countries, particularly the European supremacy movement. They're becoming a threatening situation for the European community by itself.
So, Doctor, then just expanding on that a little bit, what are the emerging tactics that you've observed when it comes to social media use and in this region particularly? What are the trends that you're seeing?
If you're looking into general safety, public security, of course, we're talking about the scammer, modus operandi of the scammer, how they use,
which is also a very big problem.
Because they are also growing, because it is a very likely much element of syndicates that looks into on how it's supposedly to target its customer clients or to preach into what they believe into. There can be attacks and how they can manipulate the victims. For example, the using of such element of keywords. If you look into some certain keywords, when we post something on social media, we might be forgetting that we are putting some keyword. For example, lonely. Right, so there might be an element of software extraction that can create and extract the word of people that put that lonely to be monitored under the love scam element. Correct. So it's just like using what we call them language learning process, language learning machine, by understanding on how the computation works. And this is not even talking about algorithm yet.
Yes.
This is basically by monitoring some certain keywords. So if this is not have any form of aggregation within the ASEAN countries, just imagine how the software data extraction can use that element of lonely words or some element, let's say, inferiority complex. I've been bullied, for example. So it can be used of this data generation to create a major data, an offset data, or it is online, offline data, to create the opportunity to tackle all these people that have been bullied, that have inferiority complex, to convert them to become much more radical extremism in order for them to spoke out. So in order for them to be what we call to revenge against the community that have bullied them, one of the way is through radicalism and extremism outlet.
Is there an element of artificial intelligence here already or not yet?
We not even discuss on artificial intelligence yet. All right, when we talk about artificial intelligence, of course we have generative AI. For example, they can have some mimicking element of voice, content, structure or anything, and there are some automation element involved.
Correct.
So this is when the combination of AI, combinations of this modus operandi being used by element of the scammer, some people out there who try to sabotage, to manipulate, to victimize the people in the media, social media. So this is when it becomes real. We're not talking that the threatening situation is that bad, all right? It's not that the ASEAN don't have any form of regulation. It's not that the police is not working. It's not that M7C is not doing their work, on context of our countries. But we are projecting into a very volatile situations of a threatening situation that might be happening if we don't really look into this matter seriously. Right. So this is where the AMRI came in and Declaration of Kuala Lumpur, looking into social media safety guideline that will be underscored and of course heading by the nation. In this context, it's very much important for the ASEAN to understand whether we are capable to move this together or whether there be some isolation, or maybe there's some incapability for us to look into these foundations of new forming threats that's happening around the world. And this is something I think is quite good for us to discuss today as well.
So coming back to the declaration, you see this as a policy breakthrough, or at the moment is it more of a symbolic gesture?
In the context of that, I'll beg to differ in the context of, in terms of the policy that will bring some elements of regulation within it. Because we are in the nature of, if you look into ASEAN political security community, I'm not saying that I'm against what ASEAN has been doing, because ASEAN basically is a very interesting scenario that we have in the context of regional power and the context of middle power in these global representations of worldwide structure that we have. But it happened to be that ASEAN really believe in the stability and the harmonious elements of living within its community, territory and the other countries. And we are basically very much multilateral networking countries that exist in this country region system. So what happens is that when we talk about EU Artificial Intelligence Acts that they have in European Union to protect the European community. So it's a binding law.
Okay.
It's binded through a form of law and regulations. And ASEAN guideline on artificial intelligence, ASEAN guideline in most of the elements that we have is basically a non-binding.
Yes.
So when it's non-binding, it's good. I would say that it takes ASEAN to have a good step in promoting, in accepting the declarations in Bandar Seri Begawan recently, and to look into the project. But ASEAN have to move really strong, and of course this is one of the things that we, Malaysia, can champion. Inputting the social media safety guideline that might be used, might be tabled by, might be or might be in practices to be gazetted by, hopefully by next year, whenever it takes. But it need to be have some element that have some binding element.
That's
so the non-binding law element will kind of not be that helpful when we talk about regulations to look into and how to regulate and how to impose some certain of law punishment to all the social media scammers, culprit, radicalism, extremism. So this is something that ASEAN have to be really considered. But nevertheless, I think this is very much significant. I think Malaysia really have to be in the winning streak of this, because they accepted our part, they accepted our proposal declarations, they accepted that we have what we have been done in the context of social media regulations. I think this is a pathway for us to prove that we have all the system, we have everything in detail in our country. It's just a matter of putting it in context of the social media diplomacy, cyber diplomacy, for us to be muchly recognized of what we have done in our social media progress in the region, in the country, and of course to bring all these elements to share it within the ASEAN territories and country, and to promote ASEAN stability and ASEAN social media identity as well.
And speaking about ASEAN, we have various countries who have, geographically we are close, but each country is different. We differ significantly in values and the guidelines that we already have. So how do you think we can respond to a set of unified guidelines? Now, you mentioned that these are non-binding. Should we be heading very quickly towards a binding agreement in the future, or do you think that'll take time and no one's to say anything at this point?
The non-intervention policy of ASEAN, the ASEAN diplomacy stated in ASEAN Political Security Committee, is something that we have to look. It's quite a very unique element of strategy of ASEAN on how to maintain the political security stability in the regions. I think we have to stick with that. But in the context of looking into the cultural representations, the segmentation different between ASEAN countries, this is where ASEAN have to move into what they're doing very good now. They have to look into much more diplomatic efforts to bind the nation together, to look into some jointful resources, jointful binding elements of law later on in the future, hopefully, and to make sure that ASEAN regions have elements of what we call a significant boost of identity, meaning that this is a time for ASEAN to lead at least some certain thing in the global apparatus of social media. We don't have even our own platform yet. We don't even have our own technological elements that we can look into as one of the ASEAN's innovation. So perhaps by moving into this structure, at least we are coming up with some drafting policy, some working policy that can be a benchmark for ASEAN and other countries as well. And we also can look into the cross-cultural community. Let's say we look into our federal constitution, Article 10. We stated that the freedom of speech 10.1 is very clearly stated that freedom of speech in the context. But there are limitations of freedom of speech. And one other element that's stated, I think, within the Article 10.4 is that we have to respect on other countries, including the diplomatic element. So there must not be any form of intimidating of other countries, not be any form of intimidating other foreign countries, particularly in the ASEAN's or in the global community, what they've been done. So this is not supposed for us to interject. It's not supposed for us to intervene in other form of diplomacy. So how do we bring that form of label in the cultural cross-community of the ASEAN community? We don't have to, we don't want that the quarrel, the meanings and the non-diplomatic elements. We have a very good individual community diplomacy within the country. For example, our country, Indonesia, we and the Vietnam, Thailand community, the sharing common values of ASEAN. So this will diminish the possibility of divide and conquer element of social media. This will diminish the elements of what we call the apparatus of looking into some extremism, radicalism based on nationalism. So this might be some little bit more exaggerations when we talk about this, but this is something the ASEAN values have to be put into that. We must have something the ASEAN can be proud of.
Okay, Doctor.
The common values of ASEAN.
I need you to hold that thought. We will continue this conversation in a bit, but we do have to go for a very short break, and we'll be right back. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
In order to create a culture of continuous learning and innovation, we challenge our people to exceed their expectation while providing them with budget for innovation. Maintaining open lines of communication where feedback is important and rewarding their innovative contribution to reinforce the value placed on creativity. By providing the tools and resources to our team, I believe this will enable us to continuously improve as we progress in delivering exceptional customer experience and operational excellence.
Now we are back on the table. We are speaking to Dr. Nur Nirwandi Matnurdian, Security and Political Analyst from UiTM. And the topic today is ASEAN's push for a safer digital space. Now, Doctor, you were speaking about balancing security with freedom of speech. How do we tackle that?
In the context of our country, let's say for the context of our Malaysian country, as a Malaysian, we know that we have freedom of speech.
Yes.
We are stated in Article 10(1) freedom of speech. But of course, we have to understand what are the limitations of freedom of speech.
Yes.
So this comes with what we call the realizations of what we call responsibility for the freedom of speech. So this is also what we need to do. We have the Press Freedom Index, and then we are moving, I think, like much more better scale compared to last year. So meaning that we are basically in good track. So in the context of freedoms of speech online, so this is where what we call the social media safety guideline. One of the core element, of course, is in the context of the freedom of speech. So they really have to be stated that in the context of ASEAN countries, what are the things that ASEANs can monitor truly together in form of their citizen freedom of speech, in terms of the media freedom of speech, in terms of elements of ideological freedom of speech. So this is what we call a kind of challenging part of the ASEAN because of the multicultural elements, difference of region element, difference of the cultural assimilation background.
That's right.
So this is where we need the ASEAN identity to come in. This is where we need to project something in common of ASEAN. Non-intervention policy is a very
finding
beautiful...
common ground.
Yes, finding a common ground, but it's not something that is much really to be done by some context of normal regulation process. So you need to at least have some ASEAN algorithm, for example.
Okay.
ASEAN identity algorithm. What can ASEAN people share on a daily basis, monthly basis, by putting up ASEAN elements of fundamentalism. Of course, there's a not right word to use as a part of fundamentalism in the form context, positive context. They have to look into the fundamental positive values of ASEAN. So what need ASEAN to be projecting in the common values of ASEAN, in cherishing the identity of that. And when we have conflict around ASEAN, so what do we need to do? For example, there's a disaster, earthquakes, what happened in Myanmar. So how did ASEAN respond towards that? How did the people of ASEAN respond to that? How the NGO responded? So this is something that have to be used cleverly by all the ASEAN community, by standard of good practices, by the journalists, by all the media practitioners, talk shows, forums that we talk about this. So eventually it will generate an element of freedom of speech algorithm within the accepted territory of frameworks of ASEAN people. And this is what I do believe, that we have the common identity.
Yeah.
We can bring that value together, and we will try to put up the segregations of these nationalisms of ASEAN countries that within some ASEAN territories, within the ASEAN bloc, and slowly I think we can project some better image of ASEAN community as according to ASEAN Political Security Committee agenda, guidelines, characteristics that we underline under the APSC as well.
Okay. Now, Doctor, when it comes to the declaration, I'm wondering, is there any regional blocs, or aside from ASEAN, who have come up with systems like this, and which is already in place? Maybe ASEAN can be learning from it, or can we adopt some of their measures which are effective?
Yeah, I think if you look into the comparative element, comparatively you can look into EU. EU have their own elements of looking to EU Artificial Intelligence Act, as I mentioned before, and some regulation to look into how the social media elements of networking works. And of course, it's very differ by some countries of some representation, depending on the platform, the capability, technological apparatus that they have. So this is also the time for ASEAN to move into another level, not only become the followers of social media, but to become the innovator of the social media. So we are innovating the social media safety guideline. Underscores by our country. Malaysia is a proud element for us. This is under the chairmanships of Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim as the chairmanship or leadership of ASEAN 2035. So what's next for ASEAN to innovate? So ASEAN at least have to look into some forms. If they have some representations of all the platform or social media platform, artificial intelligence apps that coming. So we need to also to develop ASEAN set of structures, similar representation that we have. So this is looking into some countries, particularly the European countries, EUs. They are looking into moving forward into how to make sure that the minimizing elements of economics collapse, minimizing elements of economics deteriorations, ideological identity of Europe will not be reduced by the imaging of this all element, artificial intelligence, social media, networking, and so on. So this is what ASEAN have to learn. So we really have to create our own identity. We have to really look into our applications, platforms, social media, sentiment analysis, and in fact, putting up our form of ASEAN algorithms in a context where it can be used to minimize the threat from the scammers, from all the terrorism and all the radicalism elements.
Doctor, when you say ASEAN algorithm, what exactly do you mean?
All right. Of course, in element, we have our own algorithm. What we see every day, what are our hobby in social media, what pop up in our social media platform. So that's our algorithm.
Yes.
And this algorithm is what we call natural algorithm based on our representation. So the LLM, the machine, the apps, we learn and provide what we have been doing or exposing and applying every day in the social media. So this is the time ASEAN have to move much more bigger on that. So what is the ASEAN algorithm?
Yes.
So what are common values of individual of ASEAN, nation community, that project the nationality of ASEAN's, the harmonious element of ASEAN, the sport of ASEAN, the culture of ASEAN, the ASEAN people can be proud of. So it becomes an individualistic ASEAN algorithm, a community of ASEAN that can be shared across all the platforms. So this will be something that ASEAN could innovate because we don't have our own social media platform under the ASEAN brand.
That's right.
So this might be something new, something challenging if we move ahead looking into what ASEAN can do. But this is what I call, this is something fundamental happen here. The Kuala Lumpur Declaration boosts up our reputations as a middle power, social media player, our regulations, our networkings and what we can do. And hopefully this blueprint of social media safety guideline that have been announced by our Deputy Minister. They are looking into the chairmanship of Datuk Seri Ibrahim PMX. It will be happening soon, and this will be endorsement of Malaysian player capability as one of the ASEAN elements blueprint for the social media safety guidelines.
So, Doctor, we do have only about 2 minutes left. I have a final question for you. Now, what, in your opinion, would be a successful ASEAN digital space, say, in 5 years' time? What do you think we should be aiming for?
I think what we should be aiming for is to put ASEAN as a powerhouse of social media in this region. I mean, globally, you have to put our mark there. We have our regulations, we have our ASEAN elements team, and we have to protect the ASEAN microeconomics. Microeconomics meaning that, of course, the ASEAN community will have their own countries that looking into the people, economic value, people representation, because at the end of the day, it is about dollars and cents and about ideological representation of ASEAN. So we really have to protect the dollar and cent of ASEAN community, ASEAN countries, in order that we are not being monopolized by any foreign platforms. And foreigners is much more countries that using ASEAN as a platform to rip up some elements of monetary economic boost without giving space for ASEAN to have their own identity. So this is, I think, one of the outlets that ASEAN have to be looking into that, protect our microeconomic system, and to have our own ideological representation of ASEAN identity that we have a strong common value as stated in ASEAN Political Security Committee.
And hopefully that leads to a safe and inclusive digital environment across ASEAN. Dr. Noor Nirwandi, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your insights with us. It was very, very enlightening. Thank you.
Welcome.
And that's all the time we've got for On the Table this evening. Thank you to Dr. Noor Nirwandi, Policy and Media Analyst from UiTM, for sharing his insights with us. A repeat of this episode's broadcast can be viewed again at the same time tomorrow and subsequent days on both the RTM Click and MyTV's Berita RTM channel, as well as Berita RTM YouTube channel. Till next Thursday, where we'll discuss another topic of interest. I'm Mohana Priya. Thank you for your company.